Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Active Shooter Workplace Violence Coverage Session. We're excited to have you all here today. You'll learn a lot more about what it means to have workplace violence conducted at a workplace when directed at one person against another, how it relates to insurance coverages, what are some of the statistics out there, and we will be able to provide you a connection between the current marketplace and coverages and services available. Our next slide is just a short slide to just remind everyone that this session is not intended to make insurance decisions, but a purpose of education and an opportunity to learn more from us today. Our presenters include myself. I am Senior Vice President and National Practice Leader and Principal of Segal, located in our New York office. Over 30 years of experience serving our Taft-Hartley public sector, private corporations, and not-for-profits. And happy to be part of our program today is also Anna Bell, who's our Vice President and West Regional Manager in San Francisco, also with over 20 years experience serving our clients with fiduciary, ERISA bonds, employment practices, and financial lines, including workplace violence. And then we're pleased to have also Rainer Maurer, Director of Crisis Management, joining us today from McGowan, over 35 years experience, including managing partner of the law offices of Rainer and Maurer. So we will go to the next slide. So just a little bit of Segal Select, in case you're not familiar with us, if you're new to us on the call today, over 50 years of experience of providing insurance brokerage services to benefit programs, unions, apprenticeships, private companies, not-for-profits, with all different asset sizes. We're over 30 insurance professionals nationwide, helping our clients making effective insurance decisions, and happy to be part of the program today. So what's our agenda? Most important that you walk away with working knowledge of what is workplace violence insurance. How does it differ between other insurance programs out there? What are some of the buying appetites today, not only of our Segal client base, but Rainer is going to give you a perspective countrywide, what's occurring and who is buying these types of insurance programs. Loss examples. What can happen when there's workplace violence conducted by one person against the other? What does it mean to conduct the type of violence workplace that is examples that are being provided today? And then how does it apply, to these insurance programs? The McGowan Program Administrators, one of the largest in the country, serving workplace violence clients with different markets nationwide. And Rainer will give us an overview of their products and services, as well as what's going on in the current market landscape. So with that, I'm going to turn over the program to Annabelle, who's going to tell us what is workplace violence insurance coverage.
Thank you, Diane. Hello, everyone. My name is Annabelle. In states, for example, like in California, employers have a legal responsibility to protect their employees from workplace violence, including establishing and implementing a workplace violence prevention plan. This plan must address various aspects of violence prevention, training, response, including reporting and investigating incidents. Neglecting these responsibilities can lead to employer liability. While the possibility of workplace violence event is generally small in risk, it requires preparing for a serious threat or violent event which can be devastating on the organization, employees, and those invited or visiting the workplace. Workplace violence catches most organizations completely off guard. So the big question for everyone, how can insurance help? Workplace violence insurance policies provide coverage for the expenses associated with the aftermath of an incident. Next slide, please. What constitutes a workplace violence incident? This is very important. Workplace violence is any violent act directed towards another person at work. The term covers a range of behavior, including acts of violence, threats, and other conduct that generate a reasonable concern for other people's safety. Broadly defined, workplace violence is an act in which another person is bullied, abused, threatened, intimidated, harassed, or assaulted at their place of work or during off-site work-related events. Provided a connection exists to the workplace, anyone can be a victim of such violence, unfortunately. As a workplace violence policyholder, organization will have access to a variety of insurance coverages and program services that we're going to talk about today to help reduce potential workplace violence liability and extra exposures, including, very important, victim coverage. Provides critical victim benefits to employees, guests, visitors, students for specific expenses. The main coverages include such as psychiatric care, medical or dental care, death benefit, disability coverages, and funeral expenses. Also, primary third-party liability coverage for lawsuits arising from specific violent events. Expenses related to business income, business interruption, extra expense is included in addition to public relations counsel, crisis consulting, employee counseling, and expenses associated with security measures. Who buys today? Next slide, please. Many types of organizations, including not-for-profit organizations, corporations, unions, JTCs, benefit funds purchase this coverage. Typical limits purchase between 1 to 5 million. However, higher limits are provided based on size and scope of the organization. Next slide, please. Statistics show that workplace violence has been on the rise in the last few years, likely fueled to at least some degree by the pandemic and social unrest. 2 million victims of workplace violence are annually. That is a big number. 1 of 7 people feel unsafe in the workplace, and we have included some of the resources, and that will be provided in the slide as well for you to review. Next, our presenter, Rainer, with McGowan Program Administrators, he will discuss importance of the workplace violence risk insurance coverage, and we're pleased to have him. Rainer?
Thank you, Anna. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rainer Maurer. I am the director of McGowan's crisis management programs, including our active shooter workplace violence and risk and insurance program. Next slide, please. This is just our legal disclaimer. We'll go right through this legal stuff. You can read it at your pleasure or your leisure. So we'll go to the next slide. So what is an active shooter or workplace violence event? When you think about in terms of our program really covers 2 types of events. It's an active shooter event where an individual may come on premises, on your insured's premises, and become involved in some type of shooting event, or as Anna suggested, and a very important part of our program, which is often overlooked, is the workplace violence type event. And so we're going to discuss both of them. And so what really, what constitutes an active shooter event? Well, that really depends upon whom you ask. If you ask the FBI or Homeland Security, they define an active shooter event where there are 3 or more fatalities. Typically, the media covers active shooter events if there are 4 or more fatalities. I think what's important to remember relative to our insurance program is that we don't require a fatality. Some programs do, but with our program, the coverage trigger is not a fatality. It's not 3 or more fatalities. It's not even 1 fatality. The trigger for a trigger event for our program is that a weapon needs to be displayed or brandished, right? It doesn't even need to be used, but as long as it's been displayed, that will trigger a coverage event. So who commits these acts? Well, it can be anyone in between. It can be customers, it can be clients, it could be patients, it could be third parties, it could be employees, supervisors. We've seen it, a number of different circumstances. Domestic partners, relatives of employees. Typically, where you're looking at a perpetrator who is a male between the age of 18 and 25. And we'll talk about some circumstances that are driving some of that behavior as well. Next slide, please. So and I'm glad that Anna spent so much time talking about workplace violence, because, often when we take a look at our program and we talk about active shooter coverage and workplace violence often gets overlooked because it doesn't receive as much press as an active shooter event. But it is very important that we discuss workplace violence. The active shooter events obviously are very tragic and can be very significant and very severe from an insurance standpoint, but workplace violence is far more frequent. I mean, I'm glad that Anna spent so much time discussing that. As far as OSHA is concerned, workplace violence is any act or threat of physical violence, harassment, intimidation, or threatening disruptive behavior that occurs at the worksite. And it can range from anything from threats, verbal abuse, to a physical assault, or even a homicide. Excuse me. So again, as Anna suggested, there are over 2 million American workers that are victims of workplace violence every year. 2/3 of those events result in homicides, and often the assailant was a third party, or really had no personal relationship with the victim at all. Workplace violence is the second leading cause of worksite deaths in the U.S., with approximately 700 workplace homicide victims per year. And 1/3 of those did have a personal relationship, and 2/3 did not have a personal relationship at all. Okay, next slide, please. So why is this so important? Why is workplace violence so important as it relates to OSHA? In OSHA, in the U.S., several sources of law obligate an employer now a duty of care for the safety, health, and security of the employees. Excuse me. So OSHA says, yes, you as an employer, you do have a duty of care that requires protection against workplace violence hazards. Injuries that are reasonably foreseeable can impose liability for negligence on those employers. I once worked for an organization. We had a large call center down outside of Tampa, Florida, and we had about 800 employees at that location. And we knew, as the employer, we knew that on a Monday morning, particularly after a very nice weekend in Tampa, that on Monday morning it was highly likely, or even possible, that we were going to have some type of workplace violence event, where we would have a spouse or a significant other that were coming onto our premises to try to settle a score from the weekend before, right? And so we had, as an employer, we had reasonable foreseeability that an event could occur. It happened frequently on Monday mornings. And so as far as OSHA was concerned, we had a duty of care to all of our employees to make sure that our property was protected, that our employees were protected, and that no harm would come to them. Next slide, please. So what does that mean to your clients' organizations? And it really means that you need to prepare your organization, right? You need to have a written policy. You need to recommend that they have a written policy against workplace violence, and that policy is communicated to all the employees. And I think in terms of all of your organizations, they all have fire drills, for example. They have fire policies, and throughout the year they might even have those fire drills where they're testing out their policies to make sure everybody's within compliance. That should be true relative to workplace violence as well. So people should, your employers and their employees should understand that in the event a workplace violence event occurs, they know exactly what's going to do. That they trained their workers to know what to do, how to respond to a violent situation. Next slide, please. So, shifting on to, active shooter workplace violence insurance events, these are some of the expenses that are typically incurred when one of your clients suffers from an event. So there are victim expenses, right? Obviously you're going to have victims that require medical care, potentially dental care. You're going to have victims, perhaps even employees that require counseling because they were witnesses to this tragic event. There might be salaries, rehabilitation, funeral, burial expenses, loss of sight, loss of hearing, death benefits, disability benefits. Those are the victim expenses. Then in addition to that, you've got your insured your organization may have legal liability expenses as well, where some of the victims or the families of the victims may be suing your insured for failing to protect adequate safety, or and even statutorily, they could be liable because they failed to meet OSHA requirements. Your insured often will be out of business for a period of time, right? While the event is being investigated, there might be some cleanup, there might be some repairs, and so they're going to be out of business for a period of time. They're going to have some type of event. Go back one more slide, one slide, please. They could have some type of post-event crisis management as well, which is very, very important. And so we have, part of the coverage is make sure that social media is being monitored, that your insured is still being favored and is being displayed in a favorable social media light. Our coverage also offers off-site exposure. So to the extent that your insured have employees that go to, let's say, a business conference, and while attending that business conference, there is an active shooter event or a workplace violence event and they are victims of that event, those off-site employees will be covered as well. As I suggested earlier, we're going to cover reputational harm and social media monitoring. And then our program also offers physical damage. So to the extent that the building suffered damage and requires some rehabilitation, we'll cover that as well. A bit about our term, our capacity, and our limits. Our minimum premium is $1,200. As Anna suggested, our standard limits are $1 to $5 million. I would say that over the last 2 years, we're beginning to see those limits increase. Where historically, when I first started, a couple of years ago, many of our limits generally our limits were between 1 million and 5 limit, but we're seeing insureds insure for much higher limits. Now typically we're seeing $10 to $15 million limits. We have capacity to write very quickly up to 50 million, and if we need to, we can always contact some of our excess carriers in London for capacity up to $100 million. We have several risks, several large risks, an airline, a sporting arena that are looking for those types of large $100 million limits. Retentions are typically between 0 and 10,000. There typically is a self-insured retention. Most of the time, I'd say that we're looking at $1,000. It is a 12-month policy term, and there are aggregates on the policy. And our program, unlike similar programs, we include business interruption. Business interruption is automatically included in our standard policy. As far as some unique coverages or what we're seeing within the market, more and more carriers, there aren't too many carriers that are offering this type of coverage. It's very, very unique. I'd say that we probably have about 2 or 3 competitors in this space. Some of them exclude terrorism. Some of them exclude employees. Many of them have casualty threshold limits, as I indicated. There's no coverage unless there have been 2 or 3 casualties. Many of them exclude vehicles. And so our coverage, we do not exclude terrorism. Employees are covered under our program. We don't have a casualty threshold limit. As I indicated, coverage is triggered by the display of a weapon. What's very interesting about our program is vehicles are considered a weapon under our program. There is no vehicle exclusion. And as you know, this has become very important over the last couple of years because you're seeing more and more of these events occurring as a result of the use of a vehicle. Think in terms of New Orleans recently. We're seeing this type of event in Europe fairly frequently where vehicles are being used as a weapon. We do not exclude vehicles as a weapon. We don't exclude drones as a weapon, and there is no requirement that an explosive be physically attached to the assailant. If an explosive is used and is not attached to the assailant, it's still going to be covered. What's really important about our program too is that mental anguish is not excluded. We have some competitors that do not cover mental anguish. This is probably one of the largest benefits of our program. Again, because you don't necessarily need to have a death victim. You don't need to have a fatality. To the extent that there is an active shooter event, even if that active shooter did not discharge his or her weapon, you're going to have individuals that witnessed that event and individuals that will suffer some form of mental anguish and need counseling. We're going to cover that under our program. So who is buying these types of coverages? What is our typical insured? So if I go around clockwise on the screen, we are seeing more and more manufacturing operations that are purchasing this coverage, not necessarily for the active shooter element of the program, but because they're so concerned about workplace violence. You're seeing more and more workplace violence occurring in a manufacturing type operation. Education has become one of our largest segments, as you can imagine, and that's not just colleges. We're insuring colleges, we're insuring school districts, we're insuring trade schools, we're insuring daycares. So education is a common one of our top 5 classes. Obviously, religious institutions is another top 5 class. We're seeing more and more houses of worship seeking coverage for this type of event. Retail establishments, in part because there's money being transpired, and so retail establishments is one of our top classes. We do write special events, so it's although most of what we are writing is on an annual event, an annual policy. If you have a special event that you need to that your insured would like to purchase active shooter or workplace violence coverage for that specific event, we can provide that coverage as well. Obviously, bars and restaurants, another class of business that we see fairly frequently, and we're seeing more and more workplace violence events occur at healthcare facilities. Patients acting out, relatives of patients that are concerned regarding the care of their loved one. So we're seeing more of those types of events occur at healthcare facilities, and healthcare facilities has become one of our largest classes of business as well. Submission requirements very easy. We just need a signed application. The rating methodology is very simple. We look for the number of employees. We're looking for the number of annual guest students or patients. That we're looking for the number of locations, hours of operations, years in business, any protocols that the insured might have relative to hiring practices, safety protocols, those kinds of things, and then obviously loss experience as well. So again, if we're looking at insuring a school district or a trade school, for example, we would want to know the number of employees at that trade school. We would want to know the number of students at that trade school. We would want to know the number of guests that are coming in and out of that trade school. We would want to know the number of locations, hours of operation, years in business, those kinds of things. So it's a relatively simple rating methodology. There are additional factors that can influence pricing. Again, I mentioned earlier about retail establishments and the exchange of money that tends to generate some interest of these types of events. Working with volatile or unstable people. We insure some medical facilities that care for volatile people that require mental health care. And so those types of factors can influence pricing. Working in isolated areas, one of the biggest factors, as you know, is the perpetrators of these types of events will often look for soft targets, right? So they're looking for targets where they can gain access to a large number of people, and those people aren't secure by buildings or have security. And so that's why obviously concerts and those types of events. Even schools can be targets for these perpetrators. Anywhere where there's alcohol being served. So again, we ensure a lot of bars and restaurants, obviously, because wherever there's alcohol that is served, it's possible that you might have a couple of patrons get into a fight and a weapon may be displayed. Working late night in areas with high crime rates, that obviously is a factor. And those are factors that we consider in our pricing, in our underwriting. And then again, as I suggested earlier about large gatherings of the public in what we consider to be soft target areas or areas that don't have a high degree of security. I would encourage you, if you'd like to learn more, you can go to our McGowan Programs website. We do have an active shooter a web page that has you can download marketing material, you can download resource guides. There's a video series. The application is there, and so there's a lot of good information on the web page. So as I suggested, again, there's a fillable application that can be completed. You can submit that application online, and we'll pick it up. Or if you prefer to actually print the application, you can send it through Segal. It can come to me, and we'll assign it to one of our underwriters for consideration. So let's talk a little bit about the workplace violence, active shooter events that have been occurring. And obviously, we're seeing a higher frequency of these types of events, and the aggregates are really beginning to increase at a dramatic level. And so we'll take a look at some statistics around some of this stuff that are a bit alarming. So the United States tracks the number of mass shootings every year. And they often track the number of days it takes to reach 400 mass shootings. And you can see that in 2019, it took 356 days to reach that 400 threshold. In 2021, it took 212 days to reach that 400 threshold. And in 2023, it took 203 days. And I can tell you in 2024, although I don't have the exact statistic, it was less than 200 days. So the frequency is certainly increasing. And the rate of mass shootings in 2023 has consistently outpaced all those years with an average of nearly 2 mass shootings per month. And again, 2024, we did not see a decline in that frequency. And I think it's also important to understand that this is not just an urban issue. These mass shootings, this is sort of a snapshot of the mass shootings that occurred in 2023. They're occurring throughout the United States. And so it's not necessarily just an urban issue. It's not necessarily just a crime issue. Again, these mass shootings, the perpetrators of these mass shootings are often seeking soft targets, right? So they're looking for locations that have volumes of people, like a shopping mall, for example, where security may not be very strong. So it's not just an urban issue. This can occur these mass shootings occur throughout the United States. So just again, a little bit more about these mass shootings. The U.S. Secret Service, the U.S. Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center, they examined a control group of incidents in which 3 or more persons were harmed. That's their definition of a mass shooting, or were carried out in the workplace. And what they were really looking for is they were looking to identify key themes that resulted in these shootings. And what they found was in this control group, that control group resulted in the loss of 147 lives and injury to nearly 700 people. And as you can imagine, that has a devastating impact on the victims and their families. Victims and their families, witnesses, first responders, the businesses themselves. And so these are very traumatic events. And again, regardless of whether these attacks were acts of workplace violence or domestic violence, school-based violence, they the backgrounds of these perpetrators are relatively similar, and we'll get into that in a bit. And so some of those backgrounds, so what we're finding is nearly half of those people in that control group were motivated by a personal grievance, right? They had an issue at the workplace. They had a problem with their employer, their supervisor, perhaps a coworker, or also fairly frequently a domestic issue that spills into the workplace. Over half of the perpetrators in that control group had criminal charges, prior criminal charges, or had mental health symptoms. Over half of them had a history of illicit substance abuse or use. All of those perpetrators in the control group had a significant stressor in the last 5 years. And over half of those had indications of financial instability in that time frame. I find this particularly troublesome because if you consider what has occurred in the United States over the last 5 years, consider how impactful COVID has been to our society and what kind of significant stressor that has produced for so many people, including financial instability. So this idea that that these stressors are going to continue to produce these types of mass shootings and or workplace violence, I think it's something that is reality, and it's something that we're going to have to deal with. And over 3/4 made very concerning communications, or produced some type of communication or elicited some level of concern before the event actually occurred. And on average, those who did elicit concern caused more harm than those that did not. So, for those that actually produced some type of communication, it was far more likely that they were going to fulfill that threat. Next slide. School, as you know, the school shootings are very traumatic, and it's not only traumatic for the families of the school children, but the employees, the members of that community, and really, I think it sends shockwaves throughout the United States. And unfortunately, those school shootings have been occurring far more frequently as well. And so, if you take a look at 2021 to 2022, public and private schools spanning both elementary and secondary levels, we had 327 shootings during that period of time, and that was a record high, resulting in 188 casualties, 188 casualties and 57 deaths. So very tragic, very not only for the families, but also the employees, the teachers, the administration, but the communities as well. And these types of events obviously produce a lot of news, right? I mean, whether it be a school shooting or a shooting at a concert, these types of mass shootings produce, a lot of news buzz, and that results in some significant jury awards. And so, if you take a look at one bar shooting victim, that was a claim in Washington. That jury awarded the estate of one of the victims $3.7 million. In New Mexico, there was a school shooting victim that received an award of $2 million. In Washington, there was a girl that received a $1.2 million settlement over school shooting. So these are significant, can result in some significant jury verdicts. And so what happens, right? Some additional examples of how expensive these claims can be. If you take a look at Virginia Tech, for example, that resulted in over $50 million of compensation that was distributed. There was $11.4 million of safety and security upgrades, a lot of cleanup and renovations that took place that resulted in $6.4 million, $4.8 million of legal costs. There was on average, each of the victims of that shooting received $95,000 in health coverage. And so these claims can be very, very expensive. Virginia Tech, well over $50 million. Then there's Parkland school shooting. Again, An educational foundation collected more than $8 million for the victims. They set up a separate committee to decide how to distribute those funds. The school district, this unfortunately becomes somewhat common, where where these shooting events occur at schools, the buildings are often raised because they don't want to send children back into that traumatic setting. And so and again here in Parkland, that school where that shooting occurred, that school was destroyed, and a new school had to be rebuilt. And so again, very, very expensive types of losses. Mandalay Bay, again, it's an outdoor concert. A significant number of victims, resulting in a victim fund that was where $31 million was distributed in just the victim fund alone. 14 people received over $200,000 in medical benefits. They had been hospitalized for more than 24 days. And so again, I don't want to belabor the point, but these can be very, very expensive claims. And when we talked a bit about limits. Typically, as I suggested, typically our limits are 1 to 5, but we have seen an increase in limits, particularly from some of the larger organizations. And now we're writing far more frequently. We're writing $10 million limits, $15 million, in some cases $50 million limits. You can see how quickly $50 million, how quickly that can be burned, right? And so, in the event that there is an active shooter event, it doesn't take long to get through $50 million of coverage. So this is really what we're all about, right? This is what our program is all about, and that is our program was designed to help the victims, right? What's happening is, as you know, if in order for the general liability coverage to apply, there has to be a determination of legal liability, right? So your insured may have GL coverage, but the GL coverage is not going to be triggered until there's a determination of legal liability. So let's say, for example, you insure a trade school and you've got GL coverage, and the GL carrier is not going to start paying benefits under the GL until someone has determined that the trade school is legally liable for that event. And by the time, and as you know, for it to work its way through that legal process, that can take years. And what occurs over that period of time? The shooting victims, the estate, they're not receiving funeral benefits. The shooting victims aren't receiving medical benefits. The employees aren't receiving counseling. Your insured isn't receiving business interruption. And so those delays can result in significant damage and harm. And our program was designed to cover that from day one, regardless of legal liability. Next slide. So again, our program is designed to, we'll step in day one and we'll start paying checks for death and disability. We start paying checks for employees who need counseling. We start helping your insured with business interruption coverage, property reconstruction, public relations counseling, social media monitoring. And so all of that is designed to begin writing payments to get your insured back into a place of where their business is made whole again, and to do that as quickly as possible, regardless of legal liability. This is just an example. This was a claim I was involved in many years ago. It was a claim involving Hudson Specialty Insurance, and Hudson insured a bar in North Carolina called Snappy Slappy. I like that name, Snappy Slappy Bar. And the bar, unfortunately, there was a shooting at the bar. 2 patrons got in a fight, and there was a shooting. And then following the shooting, the mother of one of the decedents filed a wrongful death claim against the bar. Hudson Specialty insured the Snappy Slappy Bar, and the Hudson filed a declaratory judgment action because they had a firearms exclusion, And so their claim was they had no duty to defend or indemnify Snappy Slappy. And I'm sure all of you are aware of this, right? That you're beginning to see more and more GL carriers applying firearms exclusions to their policies. This is an early example of that, where Hudson had a firearms exclusion on the SPARS GL policy, and Hudson filed a declaratory judgment action saying they have no duty to defend or indemnify. And so what happens, right? That the declaratory judgment action was filed. It's working its way through the court. And if I remember correctly, it took about 2 years for the court to come back and say, yes, indeed, Hudson had a firearms exclusion. There's no coverage under their policy. They do not have a duty to defend or indemnify. And it took over 2 years for the court to make that determination. So what happened over that 2-year period? The victims' families didn't receive the funeral benefits. The people that were injured didn't receive medical benefits. The people who witnessed the incident didn't receive counseling. Snappy Slappy, the bar, didn't receive their business interruption coverage. And they didn't have any money to hire additional staff or counseling, crisis management. Bottom line is, over that 2-year period, no one got paid. Snappy Slappy went out of business. And so that's exactly what our program is designed to try to overcome that. And that's why we come in and we're beginning to write checks day one, regardless of legal liability. So this is just again, further emphasizing the point that, the benefit of our program is that we're stepping in day one, right? We're offering critical coverages without the delays associated with the determination of whose legal responsibility. We're coming in, we're writing checks, we're getting people whole. Just a quick note on landscape. You can go ahead and go through this market landscape. The market really varies by state. It's been a very stable market. All of our carriers, we write through one domestic carrier and several Lloyd's syndicates. All of them results have been pretty good, and all of them have been very pleased. So the market's been very stable. Rates have been relatively stable as well. Renewal rates have been very strong. And we offer loss prevention services. Merrill Herzog is a carrier that we have an organization we have a relationship with. They're probably the premier organization in the business to offer pre and post event assistance and risk management services. So they're terrific. They not only do they provide great pre-event risk management services, but in the event that there is an active shooter event, most of Merrill Herzog folks, they're retired military. They know how to handle these situations, and they do a great job for us.
Yeah. So it's Reiner, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
It was very, very helpful to understand what's going on in the country. Unfortunately, these events are not getting better. I think some of the staggering statistics that you showed today really highlighted the need to understand how to navigate and how to educate and train and prevent one of these events. But if ultimately something happens, what does, and how does the insurance apply? And I think the examples you gave were very good. The other thing I would say on the markets, you're right. I mean, there's a very few amount of domestic U.S. carriers that write the coverage or can at least extend to some of the coverages that you talked about today. And there's more, carrier availability through the Lloyd's market, but it does very much vary a few things with the Lloyd's markets as well in terms of what services they come with and how the policies, respond when using those services. So it is a market, though, that I agree, there's stability, but it does depend on the industry, right? And the interest of writing the different industries that are out there. For our Segal-based clients, there is more and more interest in protecting not only the premises, but I also think there's a couple of questions that we want to field here. And one of those questions, Reiner, if you could speak a little bit more about what is memorialization coverage? You mentioned it, and someone asked about that.
Memorialization coverage. Did I mention that?
And it may be part of maybe the death benefits that somebody might be asking the question
Could be.
about.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah. So, I mean, when it comes to death benefits, maybe perhaps that's what they're referring to, is, coverage is pretty broad. So whether, depending upon, what the family chooses how they choose to memorialize their family member, including funeral benefits, that's going to be covered by our program. So again, if they're a victim of a shooting for one of our covered insureds, we're going to be writing a check to try to make them whole. So that would include not only the funeral benefits, but I suppose the memorialization benefits as well.
Okay, thank you. And then there was another question regarding off-site exposure.
Yeah.
And would the coverage extend to employees whose typical workday includes visiting sites to locations that's not owned by the employer, but they're there presumably for business purposes?
Yep. Yeah, the answer is yes, and you really nicely clarified the condition, and that is they're off-site, they're off premises, and they're there to fulfill a business need. It's part of their business, their job, right? So whether it be at a conference or they're visiting an off-site location, as long as they're there for business purposes, and they become a victim of an active shooter event or a workplace violence event, that's going to be covered by our program.
Yeah, so just to add on to that, we get the question quite often, will it cover employees working at home in case an event occurs at home? Can you speak on that topic as well?
Yeah. The answer typically would be no, right? Mm-hmm. So, if somebody is at home, and they're home, after hours or on weekend, and they become the victim of a violent event, the answer is no. What we haven't come across, which I think is an interesting question, is what if that person is working remotely from their home, and the event occurs during business hours. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, until today, I've never really thought through that scenario, but I'll certainly take a look at it. I suppose the simple answer to your question, Diane, is that in most circumstances, if the person is the employee becomes a victim of a violent act at home, that will not be covered.
Okay. Thank you. So, if there is any other questions from the audience?
Just as a reminder, we mentioned it in the beginning, but one of the questions we do get is information about today's presentation. So we are recording it, and we'll send you a link to that recording in a few days.
And I do think there was one final last question regarding how does social media monitoring coverage work? Can you just explain that further?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, there are organizations out there that monitor social media, and so they're able to pick up certain buzzwords surrounding the insured. They'll monitor the insured's Facebook to see what's being posted against that Facebook, and they just want to see how people are responding, and that's why this time element becomes so important, because I think people within the social media world can be very forgiving after this type of event occurs, and we'll use a shooting in a bar, for example. They're very empathetic that the event occurred. They're empathetic to even the insured. Where things begin to unravel from a social media standpoint is where there are long delays and victims aren't receiving benefits. And so that's why it's so important not only to start writing checks as quickly as possible to try to control that social media environment, but also have people monitoring to see what's being, what comments are being made regarding the insured, and what is the social response, what is the communication response to all of that.
Okay. Well, thank you. That was helpful. So Chris, I think we're ready to wrap up, and we just wanted to thank all of you for attending today and the great questions. As Chris said, the presentation will be available, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you, everyone.